Well. The San Francisco 49ers, they have turned things around. Two consecutive wins. They got one this weekend over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Me and my guy Samir, we're here to break it down. The big news, Talanoa Hufanga's injury, and a major game this Thursday against the Seattle Seahawks. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the program, everybody. It's been a minute, but I got my guy Sunil back with us. We got a fun show going. How you doing, my man?
Doing well, man. I'm not used to this new setup. We on a new platform. You got a new intro, like Clutch Jeans. I always thought that's Marco. Shout out to Marco for getting married today. Yeah, man, it's a lot of new changes. It feels like it's been forever since we did a show together, but I'm glad we were able to get one in before the holidays.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the holidays, so everybody out there, happy Thanksgiving to you guys this week. I mean, it's a nice time to come home. I am back in the Bay Area for a little bit of time, which is a good sign. But Sunil, gotta ask you, man. I mean, Niners, they turned things around. How'd you feel about the victory this past weekend?
Yeah, I think it was a solid victory. I think you got to see some. So the one thing I'm looking for each game is, am I seeing improvement? Am I seeing progress? Are there things that are going to lead to sustainable success, especially when it comes time for the playoffs and ultimately the Super Bowl? And I think that we saw some steps. The team take some steps further into that realm of, especially on the defensive side, right? They're getting back to turning the ball over. We're starting to see these pressures actually turn into sacks. I think that, I've been highly critical of Steve Wilks and some of his scheming, especially through that 3-game loss. And I think that he's, ever since he moved down to the field, I think that he's simplified the rushing and simplified some of those defensive schemes to allow his talent to just go play. I think obviously Chase Young has been a huge addition that has led to, I think, the whole defensive line playing better. I mean, Arik Armstead is, getting sacks, obviously Bosa, Hargrave. So to me, especially on that defensive side, it looks like they're getting back to being elite. And offensively, you're starting to see the emergence of Brandon Ayuk. I know you and me in the offseason really believed that this was going to be another breakout season for Ayuk, and we're starting to see how dominant he could be when given opportunities. I like seeing the combination between Brock Purdy and Kittle starting to pick up as well. And obviously CMC is CMC, still running hard, still being elusive. And even a guy like Elijah Mitchell, Rohan, who I know, Grant always makes a comment that ends up, being a storyline in the game. And, he was questioning whether Elijah Mitchell was the right number 2 back, but he averaged 6 yards per carry in that game. And then obviously Debo being Debo, even though he didn't have a huge game, obviously his presence on the field, led to a lot of success. So I think, a 2-touchdown victory over a team that could possibly be a playoff team, and against a very solid defense. To me, it was a solid victory. And like I said, the things that I was looking for, I saw a lot of those things in the game. So overall, thumbs up.
I agree with a lot of points you make. I mean, you talk about the different ways the 49ers were struggling before and the way that they've been able to translate. One of the main things overall I thought was, offensively, the little things. Kyle Shanahan said how in the first 5 weeks, the team was going explosive play after explosive play. So the mistakes that they made didn't really hurt them as much, whereas in the 3 losses, it did hurt them. And then you talk about the second half of, the kind of losses. We talk about the way that they lost. I mean, they were close games, just not being able to finish out close games. Then in the transition, you see the offense going back to basics. You see the run game starting to materialize again. Christian McCaffrey seeming like he's healthier. Trent Williams back in the fold. So you see the run game materializing, and as a result, you're seeing really effective work in the passing game. Brock Purdy's compiled, a couple of strong games so far. It's been a good start to the second half for the 49ers on the offensive end, but the defensive end was the main talking point. I mean, the 49ers, you talk about Steve Wilks and the issues that were outlined with the scheme, and yeah, those were certain issues. I thought execution was a big issue as well. You talk about linebacker play, a bunch of missed tackles and things like that. I thought that, there was a little bit of a drop-off in play, not talent, but play. But yeah, Chase Young, defensive line, I think it's breaking out truly in the second half of the season. 6 sacks in each of the last 2 games, 38 pressures. Yeah, I'm not wrong. 38 pressures against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Armstead with 12. It just seems like this team is kind of going back into form. The defensive line is working. And you see also the coverage. I mean, I thought I named Travarius Ward prior to this past game as the most underrated player on this team. On the defense, and I think that came to fruition. Ward had a good game. The coverage, has been better with Ambry Thomas back in the fold. So I think there are a lot of moving parts for the 49ers. I think they're definitely trending in the right direction, the direction that you anticipated after the 5-0 start. So a lot of good coming out of this Buccaneers game. Let's talk maybe very slightly. What do you think the 49ers still need to improve on?
So I think ultimately Ward and Lenoir are, really, really guys that I think I would be confident depending on week after week. Like, even though they sometimes, the cornerback position, I think obviously after quarterback is the most difficult position because you can be 99% doing all the right things, and then that 1% you get burnt for a big play, and all the attention is on you for the wrong reasons. And Lenoir and Ward have both been extremely stout, bend not break. I think Lenoir's ranked number 1 in the league for the amount of snaps that he's done without giving up a touchdown. I just read a stat like that on him. So to me, those 2 guys are stellar, and while they're in there is great. The depth after that is where I think, Rohan, is the biggest question mark. I think Ambry Thomas has been a pleasant surprise. He's been my guy since the draft, and he's been, I've been clowned for being as high on Ambry Thomas as I have been on. And, better late than never, right? So he's played and played very, very well coming in. And I think, that also is a thing I think Steve Wilks should get credited for. He was really high on Isaiah Oliver. Isaiah Oliver was, hurting this defense, and he finally had the courage to bench him and, move Ambry Thomas in, move Lenoir inside on those nickel packages. And I think that's been a huge deal. Now, we did see, was it Ward that got injured, like right at the end of the game or something? Like one of the corners got injured. I forget if it was a Ward or Thomas, and then Isaiah Oliver had to come in. They put him in a blitz versus having him in coverage, which I think was a smart move by Wilks. But to me, that's the biggest question, Rohan, is depth behind, the 2 or 3 corners that we have. I trust Ward. I trust Lenoir. Thomas is playing well, but still we've also seen him not play well in previous seasons and previous games. So can Samuel Womack come back and make an impact? Can, Darrell Luter, can he come back and make an impact? Are we going to have the depth in the cornerback position? And, even, it's in the title, even in the, safety positions. Do we have enough depth in the secondary? Rohan, I think to me is the biggest question mark, and I think could, play a role moving forward, especially when we go up against, these high power offenses with the great receivers that we're going to go up against.
And I think that when we talk about cornerback depth, it's intriguing because I feel like the 49ers, they love to rely on some of these younger guys, right? I mean, you had Ambry Thomas in the fold, Darrell Luter, Sam Womack. Those are guys you talk about. Now, I do question exactly how much of an impact they could make just because of the way that they're coming back of injury. My dark horse, if anybody were to make an impact, would be Darrell Luter. I think he's a good fit. I think he was a Wilts pick in the draft. I think he's a good fit. I think his size and his athleticism probably match a little better for the 49ers. And so that's why I think I prefer him if you were talking about a guy as depth on the outside. But I think the 49ers right now, they're trying to figure things out between Oliver and between Ambry Thomas. Right now, it seems they're leaning towards Thomas's way because the matchup of Lenoir in the slot is the preferential matchup. That's kind of what the 49ers want, and that's what they're getting with solid play on the outside from Ambry Thomas. We'll see how the cornerbacks kind of go. Improvements for me, I mean, one thing that's kind of been an issue in the second half of the season, starting from week 7 on, has been the red zone. The 49ers were really, really good in the red zone in the first few weeks. First 6 weeks of the season, they were stellar. I mean, the 49ers still, if you look at statistics, they average 4 red zone trips a game. That ranks in the top 5. And then they're 6th in red zone efficiency at 61.6%. Red zone efficiency meaning how many times you get in the red zone and score a touchdown on those red zone drives. However, since week 7 onwards, the 49ers, they've only scored a touchdown on 6 of their 14 red zone drives. That's 42.9%, and that ranks amongst the bottom of the NFL. They've struggled in the red zone as of late, and I mean, it's not just one issue that's recurring with their red zone struggles. It's been penalties, sometimes, that bring you back, that makes it tougher to execute. There are different reasons why the 49ers are struggling, but nonetheless, the matter of the fact is, you aren't executing as well in the red zone right now, and that's kind of hurting your team and scoring 3 points instead of 7. And while it might not matter against certain opponents, against tougher opponents, especially in the playoffs, you want those kind of issues to get solved, to get resolved so that you are maximizing your offensive opportunities. For example, the 49ers this game, they went 2 of 4 in the red zone. They scored on 5 consecutive drives. 5. They got 27 points out of those 5 drives, kicked 2 field goals, scored 2 touchdowns, and then obviously the deep bomb to Ayuk, which was out of the red zone. Now, I think the 49ers offense is just destined for success. Why? They are really efficient in between the 20 yards, in between the 20s. They get to the red zone at a high level. That's why they score or get to the red zone 4 times a game, and why they even score, around 2.4 touchdowns per game in the red zone, which is another top 5 mark. However, you want to maximize these opportunities. You want to be even more efficient, and that's the way the 49ers can consistently get back to the 30-point margin that they were getting to in the first 5 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think sometimes those stats are true, but also, you mentioned the 2 of 4 this game. I think Trent Williams being out the game or 2 games that he was out play a big role in that as well, because the running game is just not efficient when Trent's not in there, which I think affects the red zone play as well. And I also think, Rohan, and maybe this is a conspiracy theory, I know a lot of people look at me as a Kyle Shanahan homer. There's been some plays that he's pulled out of the bag where you're just like, they're unguardable, right? Some of the crossing schemes, some of the ways he's getting these guys open. I have a feeling that Kyle Shanahan is holding back a lot of these red zone plays, because there's certain plays where you're just like, why don't you just run that all the time? Like, that could be perfect in the red zone. I forget what play it was, but it was like a cross. It was I think it was a play that they scored on where somehow Christian McCaffrey was like just wide open in the end zone because they like, I think if I'm remembering right, he was in motion. He was veering a little bit to the left, and then he cut across to the right. And because of that, the linebacker that was guarding him had to go all the way across the field, ran into some players, so it left Christian McCaffrey wide open. I do think that when it comes time, playoff time, Rohan, or in these big games against the Eagles, in these big games against the Ravens, I think he gets deeper in his bag. And I think these teams that he feels like he could beat without going deep into his bag, I think he's saving it for the teams that he needs to use it against. And this is all feelings, no facts. It just seems like there's things that he's been able to do this season where you're just like, where did that come from? Like that one play with Kittle where he's like, knew it was a touchdown even before Kittle even caught the ball. He's turned around celebrating the play. It's like things like that where it's just like he has another level that he could dig into that I think he's kind of just saving for the right moment. So I do expect the red zone play to get better. I do expect them. I mean, they scored 27. That's a field goal away from 30. Like, I think they're back on track as far as the offense and the defense. And I think a lot of it has to do with, Trent Williams, I think, plays a big role. I think Feliciano needs to get a lot of credit for his play on the offensive line as well, Rohan. And it's going to be interesting. I don't know if we're discussing it, but Burford is a little bit injured, and we don't know if he's going to play. So, I read a report that Feliciano is practicing both at left guard and right guard because Aaron Banks has a possibility to play this Thursday. So I don't know if it's in the questions, but I am intrigued to hear what you feel like the optimal offensive line for the 49ers is moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know how you don't include John Feliciano kind of in the top 5 now, or at least in a part of the rotation, because he has been playing well. And this was a question that I kind of, was starting to ask prior to the injury to Aaron Banks, because for being honest, Spencer Burford's play has not been up to par this year. It's not like he's necessarily regressed. It's just he hasn't improved, which is what you were hoping for based on his rookie year. There have been some issues overall. And so you're wondering, is there going to be a change? And I think that I think the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan hinted at it even before the Banks injury. They were considering potentially a rotation at right guard. And I think that that's something that they could look to explore as they try and get, into the second half of the season once Banks gets back from injury. So I do think that Feliciano likely has to play a role. We'll see how extensive that role is, whether it's 100% as a starter or, in a timeshare at right guard with Spencer Burford.
What would be your ideal offensive line with the grouping that we have right now?
Now, personally, I am not a fan of rotating offensive linemen. I think that that's the one position I'm not a big fan of disrupting the continuity with, which is why my personal, optimal offensive line at the moment would likely be Feliciano full-time at right guard and Spencer Burford as the depth offensive lineman off the bench. I think that that's the most optimal given the situation in that you can't have players really consistently changing positions. And so that's kind of where I'm leaning you to. But I think that, honestly, the whole right side right now is a bit of a question mark. Jake Brendle's been up and down this year. I wasn't a big fan of him being re-signed. There were guys that I preferred in the free agent market: Garrett Bradbury, Bradley Bozeman, different guys that you could have had for similar costs. The 49ers brought back Brendle, and I think it's kind of hurting them a little bit. It's not that I'm not a big fan. Well, I'm not of Colton McKivitz. I don't think that he's been, great. And I think that the issues you see back in week 1 are recurring in week 10, in week 8. And that's the main issue. It's that when you hope a guy gets in as a starter, you're hoping that there's some form of steady improvement throughout the week. I think that's something that you haven't really seen from Colton McKivitz. That's why I'm not a big fan of him, and I don't know if, especially, I don't think he's the solution going forward. Burford as well, not, I think there's been up and down play. So I'd say my alignment, given it's the middle of the season, you can't really have wholesale changes, is just flipping Burford in for Feliciano. I'm sorry, Feliciano.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think Williams Banks, solidifies that left side. I think that's the best left side that we can have with what we got on the roster. Obviously, Brendle's going to stay there. I would have same thing that you said, right guard be Feliciano as the starter and full-time starter. And I wouldn't mind them competing with Burford and McKivitz at right tackle and start having that as a competition and seeing which one of those, ends up winning the position. Because I think, like you mentioned, I think both of those players ultimately get replaced through the draft. That right tackle position. So, that's who I think they move forward with, because ultimately I think I never really worried about the offensive line because I think that, they ultimately play decent, but this offensive line has been subpar even to, my conservative standards of how good they could be. Right. So I think that Feliciano is a must. I think he's been solid. Obviously, Banks has been solid. Trent Williams has been solid. So if you can get at least 60% of that line to where you just trust it, you can make up for, the weaknesses that are there, whether it be center, up and down center play, or up and down right tackle play.
No, I agree. And I think that that's a change the 49ers will have to experiment with. I don't know if Banks is going to be back this week, but another issue is Burford. Right now is questionable for the week, given it's a Thursday week. So the 49ers don't have just one guard decision. They have two right now that they might have to make. And you really don't want both of your guards to miss this game. So we'll hope at least one of the starters, presumed starters in Banks and Burford, is healthy so that you can have, 5 guys that you at least have trusted throughout the year to play.
And I would hope Banks over Burford.
Yeah. Let's talk about, though, the major news. Talanoa Hufanga is out for the year with a torn ACL. Don't know whether he'll be back in week 1. Talk to me about the injury, what it means for the 49ers.
Brutal, right? I mean, obviously, when you're losing an all-pro talent like Hufanga, it's going to make an impact, especially on the way he, tore it. Obviously, it's embarrassing play, to say the least. But yeah, I think he's going to be missed not only for his ability, his energy, I think, is going to be something that's missed. Obviously, he's very good at, disrupting and being around the ball and things like that. So definitely a loss. Prayers up for Hufanga. Hopefully, it's a speedy recovery. Obviously, ACL injury is tough. Unfortunately, we see way too many of them in the NFL, but we also see a lot of people recover and still be able to, have long careers even after those. So, obviously now he's just recovery, have this, if you need the surgery and just healing and all that kind of stuff. But, you mentioned it in your tweet, the 49ers have, they drafted their first draft pick this year was a safety, Jair Brown, who, like Hufanga, is known for his ability to turn over the ball. And we saw it in his first game, be around the ball to get an interception. Now, there were some times where he was a little bit shaky. There were some times where he made plays, right? So I think in the short amount of time we saw, Jair Brown, you see that, okay, there is an upside there, but there is going to be a learning curve as well. So to me, I look at that and I say, okay, there's a possibility he can be efficient and be exactly what we need. But it's going to be up to him now to get mentally in that place where he is the starter, and he has to understand that if I'm a quarterback, that's where I think the weakest link is, and he's going to get a lot of opportunity to show if he could play and not. And I think for me, Rohan, the weakness that I saw is the weakness that even Hufanga had, right? And it's going to be in coverage, right? We saw that he's not the fastest guy. He could get out of position. And, he ended up, getting burnt in one of those plays. But then just like Hufanga, he has the knack of being around the ball and getting interceptions. That was what he was known for in college. So it's going to be interesting because I think they have similar skill sets. I think Hufanga might be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to tackling and things like that. But as far as, being weak in coverage, Hufanga also was weak in coverage. But being a disruptor, Jair Brown is a disruptor as well, can turn over the ball, which very similar to what Hufanga brought to the game as well.
I agree. And I mean, when you talk about the difference between Jair Brown and Talanoa Hufanga, I mean, when we were breaking them down, early on in the season, we thought they might be similar players in a way. But Hufanga, right, we've seen some of the issues over the past few weeks. Tackling issues have been there, but also coverage issues have been there. And that's question, how valuable Hufanga is. He's still a very good player. But Jair Brown, now you're talking about a rookie going into the situation, and you're right. He's not, an elite level athlete. He's more of an instinctual player. And we saw the instincts, come out. He played the hands of Mike Evans on that 4th and 4, a really nice play in the red zone, and then obviously being in the right place at the right time for the interception. Also, good positioning on the play right before that in the red zone where he was able to, his presence helped Cade Otton and him bobbling that pass incompletion leading to the fourth down. So, you see the instincts. You are right about how Jair Brown's athleticism will translate to this defense and also how quickly those instincts will kick in because this is week one. You need that to be on a consistent basis, and you want teams not to target, Jair Brown on a regular basis. The first play Jair Brown was in, or one of the first plays, he gave up a 41-yard catch to Raheem Jarrett, right up the middle of the seam, just was caught flat-footed there. So there are certain things that you do hope to work on, but nonetheless, a promising debut for him. As for this question here, does he still need surgery? This is about Hufanga on the other knee injury from last year. It's unsure. I don't know if they're going to go for surgery on that knee. He's been playing with the Baker cyst all year. It's unclear whether surgery was needed. That's something they were going to figure out in the offseason. So Hufanga has a recovery for sure to go. But it's a crushing loss for the 49ers because not only was Hufanga, a player on the field, he was just an energy guy. One of those guys that brought that youthful energy to the team, a team that, has relied on energy in the past. That's kind of what you're missing in Hufanga. He's a guy also with great work ethic. We've seen him consistently out there in training camp. We've seen him work the way he's worked. And so you do hope that recovery goes well. He's ready for 2024. It's unfortunate because this was the first year he was eligible for a contract extension. I don't think the 49ers were going to give him a contract extension, but first year he was eligible. Now next year he goes into a contract year coming off an injury, a major injury in that, trying to perform himself. So unfortunate for him.
Yeah, and when we're talking about safeties, got to give a lot of props to Tayshaun Gibson. He's, I think, been, you mentioned Ward being the underrated player on the defense. I would argue that it's Gibson, the underrated player on the defense, as far as he's been steadfast there. He's a 1-year guy. He was thinking about retirement, decided to come back. Where would we be without Gibson back there at safety? I think he's, saved some plays. I think he's played amazing. And I wonder now with Hufanga out, right? Obviously we have George Odom that could come in. I guess he would be the next man up after Brown. But I wonder, Rohan, as far as needing depth, right, and bringing somebody onto the team, they probably have some guys on the practice squad that could be there. But an old name, oldie but a goodie, Jaquiski Tartt's out there unsigned. Obviously, he's not on anybody's roster. But what would be your level of interest on a guy like Jaquiski Tartt being brought back onto the roster? Knowing the system and, being familiar with this team and needing a guy in that specific position.
Now, I was a Jaquiski Tartt proponent back, when he was initially cut from the 49ers, went to the Eagles on the practice squad, cut there. I was a proponent for him. I don't think he's the answer, though. He's too old at this stage. He hasn't played competitive football in 2 years, and I just don't know if he's the answer overall for the 49ers. Now, it's intriguing you say that because the 49ers seem like they're interested in one of their former veterans who has been injury prone as well, and that is Jason Verrett at cornerback. So maybe, they throw a call out there. I don't know if Jaquiski Tartt's the answer. I'd prefer a guy like Taylor Hawkins, a younger guy who, while he hasn't had NFL experience, has, flashed in the times that he's been on the field in training camp in the preseason and things like that. And I think he's a guy who the 49ers could potentially see be a part of their future rotation at safety. George Odom's a guy they trust. I think he'll be the first man up as well in the rotation behind Brown, and you don't really expect a rotation at safety much either. But as for safety depth, probably lean away against Jaquiski Tartt. Let me get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to go along the side of you as well. I mean, it's kind of how I feel about Jason Verrett as well. I love Verrett. He's one of my favorite players. But if DeMeco Ryans is letting him go, even though they need the same help in the secondary, you got to wonder how much is left in the tank there. And Jaquiski Tartt, you look at the team that cut him, the Eagles, they need help in safety, and they cut him. So it's like, all right, well, that's also a formidable defense, well-coached team. If they're not seeing that this player can help them, what's really left in the tank? So I think it's an intriguing name just because, Jaquiski Tartt has been a part of great defenses here with the 49ers and played well as a safety for them. But I tend to agree with you. We probably need to go with somebody younger versus, somebody with the experience of Tart.
Yeah, that's probably the direction that I probably believe the 49ers will go in if they sign, an additional safety on top of the guys that they currently have on the practice squad and on their active roster. I do like the question, though. I answered it myself. I said no. I don't think the 49ers will re-sign Talanoa Hufanga. I didn't even think they were going to prior to the injury. Now, though, that the injury is there, do you think the 49ers will re-sign Talanoa Hufanga? Likely not this year, but at the end of next year, given that his price might decrease.
So you were saying they wouldn't re-sign Huff even if he was healthy, even after his contract is up. You think they would let him walk?
I do, yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I think they would re-sign Huff. And the reason for that is I don't think they want to remake a whole safety. Which they would have to do because Gibson is going to be gone. And they already let go of Jimmy Ward the year before. I don't think that they just want to start brand new with, Brown and some other person, insert some other person that just isn't a part of the 49er culture. They usually tend not to do that, like start completely from scratch at any level of the defense. So that would be unique. That would be interesting if they would let Huff walk, because at that point he would probably be the elder statesman in that secondary, along with, Lenoir and Ward. So I think they would resign him. I still think, now obviously based off of, he has been injury prone in college, and now with the ACL injury, you got to see if, how he comes back from the injury. But to me, he's the right type of character that the 49ers look for. He's, the right type of energy that the 49ers look for. You can't ignore the fact that the 49ers have been way more prone to intercept the ball since Hufanga has been back there, more disruptive. So I think they would re-sign him just for all of those reasons.
I think that those are good reasons. And to me, here's the reason that I say, I just don't think the 49ers value the safety position as much as other teams. And we've seen that in the way that they've distributed capital. I know Jair Brown was their first pick of the draft, but he was a third-round pick at safety. They don't usually tend to go with the safety in the first 2 rounds. Hufanga, if you look at him, he was a 6th-round pick. They don't divert much capital to the safety position. I mean, Jimmy Ward's a great example. They weren't going to pay top money for Jimmy Ward. They wanted to pay him nickel corner money rather than safety money, just because they prefer to allocate their resources defensively at other positions. They value corner more. They value defensive line more. And so they also clearly value linebacker more. Safety is their least valuable position. I mean, they got other players at the positions, and I think that they believe that they'll probably be able to replenish that safety value in the draft by the time Talanoa Hufanga is contract extension eligible. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a tag candidate, an eventual trade candidate in the year that he ends up being a free agent. I do think that this question is intriguing in terms of a discount. Do you think Huff's going to come at? I don't know if Talanoa Hufanga will come at a discount, just because you don't know how he'll play next year. I think next year's play is going to be extremely important in the way his contract negotiations go, because if he's injury free and he plays at the level he played in the past, I think he can get top safety level money as a young player. He's pretty young still. I'm pretty sure he's only 24 years old or something like that. He'll enter free agency by his age 26 season. So I think that, it's a good sign for Hufanga. He's still young. He's still got potential to make that contract. I think it becomes cheaper in that sense, potentially, if he doesn't return to his full level. But I don't think the 49ers are going to shell out money for a safety. I think they'd prefer to replenish that value in the draft by acquiring capital for Hufanga, while also potentially drafting a guy in one of the upper rounds or even in the middle round. I think that that's something a direction that they could go at.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I'd push back a little bit, because even though they haven't maybe given up resources and paid top dollar for that position, it does seem like they do like continuity at that position. Ward and Tart were the safeties for it seems like it feels like the last 10 years before this new wave of safeties came in, right? So they were back there for at least, 3 years, just those two. Then, Gibson was there last year in replacement of Tart when Gibson could have walked. They coaxed him to come back because they wanted that continuity there with Hufanga. I don't know. I guess I would wonder. I would push back and be like, when have they started brand new at safety without some overlap of continuity there? To me, I can't think of a time where they were just everybody was brand new. Even with Jair Brown, like they didn't give him any playing time till an injury. So I think that he was going to replace Gibson. They would have Hufanga there, and there would be that continuity there. Then if they let Hufanga walk, it would be kind of like blank slate, which I would contend they haven't done at any position really on defense.
I think that's a fair argument. I do think that's a fair argument. But when you look at it, I think also a reason for the continuity is because it's been because of how cheap their safety talent has been. You talk about Ward and you talk about Jaquiski Tart. It's because they got him for cheap. I mean, they were willing to move on earlier, but Jimmy Ward himself said he took a pay cut to stay with the 49ers in 2020. He got paid, I think it was 3 years, $28 million, and that might seem like top money, but at the time when safeties were making 12, 13, and that's what Ward expected because 2020 and 21 were his best years of his career. I think that, when you look at the way that they've paid, it depends. It truly depends on if Hufanga will come for cheaper than you expect. If he does, I don't think the 49ers are going to move on. But Jair Brown is going to be a starter. He is going to be a starter next year, likely. Hufanga and Brown will be your two starters, with Gibson likely to retire, which means that I think that that's probably the continuity block that you have. And you might even draft a safety next year, understanding the influx of capital that you have, not only with a first-round pick and a second-round pick for the first time in a while, but you also do have third-round compensatory picks as well that you can involve. So I wouldn't be surprised if they draft a guy potentially in the third round, maybe the fourth round, somewhere like that. They could develop and eventually move off of Funga, because when you look at the finances, I just don't know if they're going to be able to fit that contract in when they prefer to allocate resources elsewhere. It's a good debate, though.
I agree with you. And I think we're on the same page. I guess my answer is I think they will re-sign Hufanga on one of the 49er type deals. I think what you're saying is he's not going to get, top safety money. I don't think the 49ers would give him top safety money. I guess I would expect Hufanga to take a team-friendly deal to stay here, but maybe not, But yeah, I agree with you. Like, especially, if they want to keep a guy like Chase Young, guys like Brandon Ayuk, you can't keep everybody. So a guy like Hufanga definitely is lower on that totem pole when it comes to allocating top money. So I agree with you there.
You bring up a good topic in BA. Let's talk about him real quick, because Brandon Ayuk is having a season for sure. What have you seen from Brandon Ayuk this year that has changed your perception potentially of him? And what do you expect the 49ers to do in the offseason?
Nothing has changed my perspective on him, because I've always looked at him as a top tier receiver. I think he's finally getting the opportunity with some injuries to Debo. And I think more importantly, Rohan, I think that him and Purdy are creating more chemistry there. And if you see, like, Brandon Ayuk he's looking for Ayuk more than he's looking for Debo. Debo's numbers have taken a big step down as you're seeing Brandon Ayuk's numbers go up. And it's because Brandon Ayuk is a pure receiver. He's running every single route to perfection. He's getting space. He can moss anybody. He could highball it. He has the speed. The way he blocks is exactly how the 49ers look for their receivers to block. He's the total package. For me, I look at Brandon Ayuk, and I do believe the 49ers will not let him walk. I think that if it's a choice between Ayuk and Debo, they're going to trade Debo to keep Ayuk. And this is my bold statement that I've said. I said this on Jesse's show. Brandon Ayuk will finish a top 3 receiver in 49ers history. So obviously we have Rice, we have T.O. Somewhere in there is going to be Brandon Ayuk. Probably won't get to number 1 because Rice is leaps and bounds over every receiver ever. But I could see Brandon Ayuk end up being better a better 49er than T.O. when it's all said and done, based off of his skill set and, the offensive system that he's in.
High praise. And the funny thing, that's the second time I've said to somebody this week that I'm giving high praise, or I'm hearing high praise for Brandon Ayuk. Marco was the first. He said that Brandon Ayuk is the best 49ers receiver since Terrell Owens. I'm sure he's going to say it on his show, but he had high praise, and I can't disagree. Brandon Ayuk has been, I have a personal affinity for him. I think he's way more talented than a lot of people believe. And I've been on the Brandon Ayuk train. I know we talked about it in the offseason. Brandon Ayuk was going to be the guy. I even said, I think, at the beginning of last year, or in the middle of last year, that Ayuk was going to be the guy over Deebo Samuel if the 49ers are going to decide. We're seeing how good Ayuk is. Now, the true thing is the 49ers, they probably will not pay two receivers. The good news is they don't have to. One, they can afford to keep Ayuk and Deebo Samuel on the books for another year. And I think that, that is a possibility I do believe is going to be exhausted. I think Ayuk and Deebo Samuel will be on this team this year or this next year, with Ayuk getting an extension, lowering his cap hit, and Samuel being on the second to last year of his deal. And then prior to the last year of his deal, would expect Deebo Samuel to be moved. But I think Ayuk is the future of the position. And I also think that when you talk about durability, Ayuk has been more durable and his play style is more durable for the 49ers. And they have a guy who they feel can replicate what Deebo Samuel does in Christian McCaffrey. He's the guy who has kind of diminished Deebo's role, while also Deebo is very important. I think he's a very big part of the heart and soul of this team, but Christian McCaffrey's there as well. And if you're talking about allocating resources efficiently, I think that's the place where you go. Ayuk is elite. He is elite. When you look at the way that he is being utilized and how efficient he's been, he's extremely efficient with his touches, and the 49ers find different ways to use him. You can talk about whatever. Red zone. He only has 3 touchdowns on the year or whatever. But if you look at the numbers, there's a pure reason for all of those concerns. I think Ayuk is in the upper echelon of receivers. I think he's reaching that element, and I think that that's the reason he's going to get paid a high 20 to 20, likely 25 million. If I'm being honest, I expect him to eclipse what Deebo Samuel earned this offseason, and I think that he's on his way to a Pro Bowl.
I agree. And I was going to ask you, do you think he gets more than Deebo? And you answered that. I think that especially in this style of offense that isn't, it's starting to become more pass heavy, but Kyle Shanahan offenses usually aren't, right in the lower end of pass attempts per game because he's a run first type guy. But for him to get the production that he gets, last week of 150-yard game, like that's not normal with, as few reps as he gets or as few targets as he gets compared to guys like CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson, who are consistently getting double-digit targets. For him to still, be able to have those type of numbers without the opportunities that those other guys have, just show if you give him more opportunities, what he's going to be able to produce.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's important. You talk about opportunities. Ayuk is like 30th in targets this year. He's 10th or top 10 in receiving yards. Not 10th. I meant top 5 in receiving yards after this 158-yard game. There's a reason that you see Ayuk maybe not being in the top 3, top 5. Like you talk about other receivers, Ayuk's there in that category. And if he isn't, it's because he isn't getting as much volume, specifically in the red zone, where he's 5th in the team in targets in the red zone. He has only 4 red zone targets this year. Every other skill position player on the 49ers that's important has more. Kittle, McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and the 4th where he's tied with is Kyle Juszczyk, So there's a reason for the red zone targets, and then all the other targets. If you look at the statistics, I've written a couple of articles on it, they're elite. They're in the top 10 in almost every major category. Explosive plays, yards per catch, yards per route run, different elements. There's a reason that Ayuk is being seen so highly by certain people. It's because the statistics kind of back that up.
And out of all of the elite receivers that are there in the thing, he's the most 49er receiver because of the blocking aspect. There's probably not another receiver in that elite genre that could block better than Ayuk could block. So he's perfect for the 49ers. It would be criminal, Rohan. It would be criminal if they don't figure out a way to keep him long-term because, like I said, you mentioned the durability. He has the mentality. He has the attitude. He has the skill set. He should go down. He should never leave the 49ers. He should retire a 49er and end up, right next to Jerry Rice as the second best wide receiver in the 49ers history.
That is some high praise, like I said. Can't disagree, though. To end today's show, though, we got to talk about the one and only Seahawks. 49ers, they're facing off the Seahawks Thursday Night Football, Thanksgiving, on the road. They got a good matchup with them. They are currently one game ahead of the Seahawks in the standings. They sit at 7-3. Seattle's at 6-4. But this game could ultimately flip it. I mean, if Seattle wins their first place, even though the standings might be equal, their first place with the tiebreaker. And so what it means is the 2 divisional games against Seattle in the next 3 weeks are extremely important. What do you got to tell me about the Seahawks?
Yeah, the Seahawks are coming off of a loss. They are going to be home, so they have that advantage. But this is, Geno's a little bit injured, right? He had to come out of the game last week for a couple plays due to I think it was a wrist injury. Kenneth Walker,
there's his elbow.
Arm injury. Kenneth Walker is out for this game, so they're going to be relying on Zach Charbonnet, a rookie, as their starting running back. So if the 49ers are going to, Jamal Adams is still out. So this is, the 49ers aren't going to be facing a healthy Seattle team. And, obviously no teams at this junction in the league are fully healthy, but they're going to be knocked up at some very important positions for them. So this is the time that I think the 49ers need to pounce on a short week where these guys aren't going to be able to get healthy. The 49ers are clicking in all aspects right now. They're coming off of a 2-game winning streak, both dominant victories. Seattle's been up and down, right? Even the victories that they've gotten haven't been dominant, Rohan. They've been gutting it out, close victories and stuff like that. There's always the case of divisional games. They're always close. You never know really what to expect in them because these teams know each other so well. But if you're just looking at momentum, you're looking at roster, you're looking at health, this should be a very dominant victory for the 49ers because I just think they have way too much for Seattle to contend with, especially when they're not at full strength.
Yeah, I think you bring up good points. Injuries are an issue. I think Kenneth Walker is on his way to IR. Geno Smith, he had an elbow injury. I mean, he came back on that last drive and did not look like he had an injury. So I think that's something. But, I mean, regardless, it was important enough that it sat him out for a portion of that game. But no Ken Walker is going to be important because Seattle, right, they're an offense that likes to be balanced. They're an offense that likes to run the football. They have been pretty successful this year in running the football. Walker has been as well, but Zach Charbonnet, he's been good, averaging nearly 5 yards a carry. So it seems like, they're going to rely on Charbonnet a lot more in this one. Obviously, the rookie, he didn't have his efficient of the game this last week when he had the most carries he's had, only 47 yards on 15 rushes. So, the 49ers, they're going to look to shut down the run because it makes Seattle one-dimensional. From there, I think that they'll have a little more success. But the 49ers, they faced the Seahawks team before. Their strategy is, winning the game in space because Seattle's going to try and get the ball out quickly, try and put Geno Smith not under pressure as much. So get the ball out quickly. That means the 49ers, you're going to have to tackle. You're going to have to defend screens well. You're going to have to tackle, and you're going to have to play good run defense because that makes Seattle one-sided. Offensively, against Seattle's defense, I mean, Seattle has made a couple of improvements right to their defense. They've looked to add a couple of key pieces. You talk about in the offseason, they added Draymond Jones from the Denver Broncos into the fold. Jones has been, he's been a guy, but the guy who's really broken out is Boye Mafe. He's a guy who I really liked in the draft last year, second-year player, outside linebacker, 7 sacks on the year. So Seattle, they got a somewhat formidable pass rush. Jaron Reed, though, defensive tackle. 49ers, they struggle with good defensive tackles, especially if you're having some issues on the interior with injuries. That's going to be something to watch. Jaron Reed's a pretty solid defensive tackle there in Seattle. So I think that there are a couple of intriguing factors in this one. But
they have some really good corners too, really good young corners too. So, that are guys that like to jump routes and things like that. So definitely need to be a ball security game for Purdy. because, if he makes some mental errors, that could definitely be interceptions and turnovers from this defense. So I agree with you. It's not something a game that the 49ers should overlook, and I'm sure they're not, but it is a game that I think that they should be favored. I think the line that I saw is they're like a touchdown favorite in this game, even though it's in Seattle. So they just have to come out and play the style of ball. I think if they win the turnover battle, play, complementary football, it should be, a 2-score kind of victory for them, Rohan. But they have to execute. They can't just hope and wish that it ends up that way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's it's a divisional game. It's clearly one that has importance to both teams. And the 49ers, I think they'll be facing some extra pressure because if you look at the standings right now, with the way that the Philadelphia Eagles just won, 49ers, they got some ground to make up. They've got 2 full games to make up. And I mean, that just makes that week 13 game against Philly even more important. Got a lot on your minds right now. The 49ers, though, can't overlook the Seahawks. This is going to be an important divisional game. They got to pull out on a short week with some injury news.
I agree. And, they have to win the games that they're favored in and to get that number 1 spot. I think this season you can see how hard the Eagles are playing for that number 1 spot. Detroit seems to have the easiest schedule of the 3 teams that could possibly get that, with the 49ers being the 3rd team there. So they have to take care of business in the NFC West. We thought that they had the potential to sweep the division. I think that the Eagles is the toughest matchup for them in the division. So they go out and they, flex their muscles against Seattle this game. It'll be a big victory for them, even though Seattle could be shorthanded. But to me, I think that they will pull it out, and I think they need to. And ultimately, like I said, even more than the victory, Rohan, I'm looking for progress, right? We obviously are going to see how Jair Brown plays, especially against a really good receiving core with a quarterback that has a pretty decent deep ball. He's going to probably try to take advantage of Jair Brown being back there. Can Ambry Thomas hold up, right? He's going to be tested on those nickel packages against, a guy like Tyler Lockett or a guy like DK Metcalf. All of those, it's going to be a game where we still have to see if these young guys are going to continue to perform the way that they've been performing.
I agree. I got a quick hitter for you because we see this question in the chat. Chase Young. Now, Chase Young's had a pretty solid 2 games, a couple of sacks, good amount of pressures. Do you believe the 49ers should re-sign Chase Young in the offseason, given how impactful he's been so far?
Absolutely. I don't know if you necessarily re-sign him to like a huge deal. I think maybe he would probably be interested in maybe like a one year kind of deal where he could make good money, but still have the opportunity to get back into the fold. But I wouldn't be against signing him long term because look, Armstead is going to be, is on his way out. Hargrave, I think you got a couple more years on him, but I doubt he's getting another contract from the 49ers because he's going to be in his mid-30s by that time. If you can, Chase Young is still young. He's younger than Bosa, right? And I think this is going to be the cheapest you could get him because even though he has the talent to be really, really good, Rohan, his performance hasn't necessarily lived up to that contract yet. So if you could sign him long-term, you're going to sign him based off of where his production is right now. And I think that's one of those contracts where he's going to outplay that contract, kind of like how Dre Greenlaw, you got him cheaper, and now he's like even playing more. That deal as year after year looks like more and more of a steal. I think Chase Young could be the same type of player where even though it might sound like, okay, it's a lot of money, it'll probably be a steal 2 years, 3 years into that deal because you're not paying him top defensive end money because he hasn't warranted that. So I think it would be great if they could sign him long term, but realistically, I think it would make sense for both parties if they sign him on like a shorter deal for Chase Young really to showcase himself, a full season with the 49ers and then get like that big money, after that year.
I'm also with you. I'm on the proponent that the 49ers should look to re-sign Chase Young. Cost is important. I don't think, though, if I'm being honest, it would be a one-year deal. I think Young would look for a multi-year deal for financial security, but I also think the Niners would not look for a one-year deal because the reason you like multi-year deals is that you can push money in the, you can backload the deal, and you might not have enough cap space to be able to afford 15 to 20 million straight up next year on a one-year deal. And so I would look for probably a multi-year deal with Chase Young, try and secure him because he's going to be good. It seems like his motor is back, and all the concerns that people had with him seems like those have kind of brushed out of the way once he's reached San Francisco. Probably look to re-sign Chase Young, multi-year deal, but price is obviously going to be the big sticking point in that argument.
And I think it's going to be more from his side than the 49ers side because, like I said, I think if you can get a guy of his talent for a $15 million a year, Rohan, that's a steal in year 2, year 3. And I don't think he could really demand more than 15 to 18 million. Probably get him on one of those Eric Armstead type deals that they got him on. I mean, it's kind of
if you
like
can get that, that's what you want because if you're talking about 15 to 18 million, that's probably in the 15 to 20 range. Like Danielle Hunter makes 17 million a year. Shaq Barrett makes $17 million a year. Guys like this, Carl Lawson, 15. If you're getting that type of price for a guy like Chase Young, who you believe is going to flourish like he has in the last 2 weeks in your system, it's a good deal for a guy who's as young as him too.
But it's also realistic, wouldn't you say? I know you're better at numbers and understanding where players are. What do you think, based off of he doesn't have years and years of production? It's more just kind of banking on his upside. Even though this season he's having a pretty good season numbers wise, he'll probably end up with double-digit sacks. But having just one good year, I don't think warrants like anything close to. Obviously, we're not nowhere close to a Bosa deal, but even if he's looking for maybe like 22, 25 million, I don't think that his numbers can really warrant that. I don't know how many teams around the league would be willing to give him based off of what his production has been.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be 22 to 25 million. I would say that the ceiling probably settles around 20 million a year. But I also think that the production he'll have with the 49ers will boost his value. And we've seen how free agency works in the past where contracts get overinflated. If they're dealt in free agency, where really there's several teams rather than just one team kind of vying for that contract, that's where you'll see contracts getting inflated. And so that's where I think some of the inflation could play in Young's favor. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'd hope, I think it'd probably cap around 20 million, but I could see 20 million for Young occurring. Someone offering 360 or 480 or something like that, potentially. Obviously, guaranteed money and all that plays into factor. And that's really ultimately how contracts go. But I could see 20 million probably being the ceiling, somewhere around there.
Would you do that if you're 49ers?
Truly depends on the guaranteed money because if they can get, if they have flexibility in the contract to where, not that it doesn't work, but where if they need flexibility in the future, I think that you'd consider it. But in a way, I don't expect Eric Armstead to have as big of a cap hit. I'm not saying that I believe the 49ers will move off him. He could be a 49er for life type of guy, but I don't expect his cap hit to be as high for the foreseeable future. I think that his cap hit will lower on his next contract. And so in a way, the money that you're diverting to Armstead now in the future, you could divert to Chase Young while having Armstead take up a lower amount of the cap space.
And you're set at the end positions for...
You're set at defensive line, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at least at the edge positions, because obviously Hargrave's a little bit older. Armstead, you're assuming his play will probably fall off as well. So you'll need to replace those. But, even a guy like Kinlaw has been playing better, and you're going to get him cheap if he, nobody's going to give him big money. So you might be able to bring him back cheap. So bringing back Chase Young, the more we're talking about it, Rohan, it might be number 2 priority behind Ayuk when it's all said and done, because I think it gives you a lot of maneuverability when it comes to the rest of the defensive line.
And you're hoping it can come for cheap, given the way that, the last year and a half or so with the injuries and stuff have been. You're hoping it can become for cheap. If you can get Chase Young on a 3-year, $45 million deal, that's going to be worth it for sure for the 49ers.
Love it, man. Love it.
But Sunil, we covered a lot in this show. I mean, we talked about Ayuk, we talked about Hufanga, we talked about the Bucs, we talked about a lot of different things, important content. Appreciate you a lot. We've done a show, haven't done a show in a while, but this one was definitely fun. Any last comments though before we head on out?
Yeah, just want to wish, thanks for everybody in the chat section for keeping it lit. Want to wish everybody a very, very happy Thanksgiving, whomever you're spending with, friends, family, or work, whatever it is. Be safe. Hopefully you get some good food in your system. Remember all the reasons why you're thankful. Obviously we're hoping for a big victory for the 49ers to be thankful for as well. But just want to wish everybody safe, happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk again very, very soon.
Yes, sir. You heard it from here, and I want you, Sunil, because we haven't done it in a minute, to lead us out.
Ooh, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll speak again very, very soon.
There you go. We'll see you guys soon.